believe. There you go. So I didn't get an introduction, a written introduction for Mike Palmer. Those of us who've been keeping bees for a while, he probably really doesn't need an introduction. Mr. Palmer runs French Hill Apiaries. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
And commercial beekeeper, makes a living with his bees. So he's here to talk to us about his methods, his resource hives, I believe, is probably the plan. But we'll listen to anything he's got to say, really. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike and have a seat and listen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Lancaster, PA, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah. What are you at, a restaurant?
Yeah, like function hall.
Yep.
Yeah. There's lots of people online as well, so we basically rented this for those who maybe aren't, for those who Zoom isn't their thing. We said, okay, we're going to rent this. You can come and sit here and watch on the big screen TV, or you're welcome to be at home and do it on your sofa as well.
Very good.
The option.
Yeah, most everybody's doing that now. So anyway, so French Hill Apiaries, I started in, what year was that? 1974, with two packages. They both died. What did I know? And so over the years, I built it up to, I have had 1,000 production hives. I kind of cut back on that because I don't really want 1,000 production hives. I try to keep it somewhere over 600 right now. In the last few years, I've had issues with varroa mites, just as everyone has. We probably make somewhere between 20 and 30 tons of honey a year and 1,200 queens, and I make around 350 nucleus colonies. And overwinter them. So this talk is about brood factories, or if you would like to call them resource hives, you may. I mean, they're not the same, really. And without my resource hives, without my brood factories, I'd be up the creek. I guarantee it. So, so that's what this talk is going to be about. Let me. Ouch! I got a shoulder issue today. I don't know, aches and pains of when you're over 70. So let me see. I need to have the host allow me to share.
You bet.
Yep, you bet. It's all new to us,
Let me see what I can do here. Hopefully that's you.
Co-host, yes. Anyway, so, this has been a really cold spring. I don't know about for you all. God, we got 3 inches of snow. I did a Zoom on Wednesday evening, and I got to show up. We got 3 inches of snow. And I mean, it's just about all gone now. But it's, today was 45 and breezy, and we're trying to evaluate nukes and look at beehives and count the frames of bees. We don't count brood this time of year because it's too darn early. But we're counting frames of bees to see how they wintered. And so it was kind of chilly for that. But, I can't wait till the weather warms up, because then what happens? It hits the fan and everything comes on so fast and we're never going to catch up. You get behind with your bees. If you got any at all, you're never going to catch up. So we're about to the point of playing catch up right now. We haven't even got everything unwrapped yet. It's just been miserable cold spring, wet. I only got stuck once. I need a gigantic 4-wheel drive tractor to pull me out, but yeah, I mean, that's the way it is in the north, right? So let me try this again. There you go. Great. So let's see, I'll put that on. You got it?
Got it.
Okay, very good. So yes, this talk is about brood factories. It's my take on the resource hive. And my intention is that by the end of the presentation, you will appreciate how important these things are to my operation, to being able to maintain an operation that's productive, you know, profitable to some degree. I mean, I could pay my bills. I guess that's all I care about, really. I always could do that. So I get it. So what is a brood factory? Well, a brood factory is a beehive, a hive of bees, whose sole purpose in life is to produce you frames of brood to be used in the apiary in whatever part of the apiary to sustain your apiary. Nothing else. It's not a honey production unit. It's just a brood factory. It's a brood making unit. Of producing frames of brood like this emerging frame. You know, you imagine how many bees are the potential. What's the potential energy of this comb of brood? It's enormous. I think there's 6,000 cells, aren't there? 6,000 cells on two sides of a 10 frame Langstroth deep. I think so, something like that. So, you know, there's thousands of bees in this that are going to emerge, and finding a place to use them to benefit your apiary is what brood factories are all about. Can any style of beehive be a brood factory? Yeah, of course. You know, but it has to match the what you use as your beehive. So if you had Langstroth hives, you would want Langstroth frames in your brood factory. Same with, I mean, a top bar hive. You could use a top bar hive. I'm not trying to limit this to any one kind of beehive. You know, I mean, if you were to go to the UK and see how many styles of beehives it would drive a nuke producer insane, trying to provide nucleus colonies or whatever to all those different styles of beehives. But so really, basically, it only has to be, the frames have to match what your operation uses. That's all. Is this anything new? Well, not really. You know, it was new to me. I discovered it for myself, as I have so many other things. And then when I read the old literature, I find out things like this, that Brother Columban was the beekeeper at Buckfast Abbey. He was Brother Adam's teacher, mentor. And in 1900, he devised a beehive that could hold 4 nucleus colonies. And then in the springtime, he would use the excess brood in those nucleus colonies to boost his honey production colonies. Well, basically, that is a brood factory. And he devised that in 1900. So that was 122 years ago. And here I am trying to introduce brood factories to people. So yeah, it's as it was in the beginning, it is now and ever shall be, right? Everything has happened before. Nothing is new. And that's the way it seems anyway. Nothing is new except for Roamites. But anyway, and so I'd like to just talk a minute about the configuration of my brood factories. My brood factories are double nuke boxes, double 10 frame nuke boxes on the bottom with a divider. And each nuke has a entrance on the opposite end of the hive. And then above that are nuke supers. They each contain 4 frames. The bottom box, the divided box, has 4 frames, each cavity. And then each super I add has 4 frames. And these things get built up they winter in 3, so that's 12 combs, 4 over 4 over 4. But during the summer, these brood factories, they get pretty strong, even though we're removing brood all the time. And so they get built up to 4 or even 5 stories high. And I want to say, what is the natural cavity of the European honeybee? It's a tree. And a tree is not horizontal. The combs aren't configured horizontally, they're configured vertically. So a Langstroth hive, for instance, or any hive, top bar hive or whatever, those are configured horizontally if you think about it. And so for a colony in a larger hive that wants to expand the brood nest, they have to expand horizontally. And in order to expand horizontally on the new comb, so the queen can expand the active brood rearing cluster, they have to grow population to get so that they can have population expand onto those empty combs and warm them and polish them and clean them and get them ready for the queen. And so that is a delay. There is a delay there of whatever. But when they're vertically configured, as in nuke boxes, there's only 4 combs wide, and they're taller than they are wide. Heat rises, and they have no difficulty in expanding upwards onto new combs rather than horizontally onto new combs. And so I think the vertical configuration, you get more combs of brood produced in a shorter amount of time, which is exactly what I'm trying to do. Are brood factories and resource hives the same? Well, all brood factories are resource hives, but all resource hives aren't brood factories. What I'm trying to say is, and this is one of the reasons I put this program together, I've seen YouTubes about resource hives. I've read literature about resource hives. I've read the bit in supply catalogs about resource hives. And pretty much resource hives, you have a resource hive in the apiary as a backup for any colony that might fail. And so your resource hive becomes a one-to-one thing. So if you have a hive you have one hive that fails, goes queenless, has a drone layer, needs to be requeened or whatever, you have a colony of bees, a nucleus colony called a resource hive, and then you can fix that problem colony with this resource hive. But it's a one-to-one thing. Well, brood factories are way more than a one-to-one thing, and you'll understand it by the end of my talk, what I'm talking about. But if it weren't for my brood factories, so much of my maintenance, so many of my resources are tied up in brood factories that, all the cell builders that we raised 1,200 queens, all the cell builders are strengthened by brood from brood factories. All my nucleus colonies are made with brood and bees from brood factories. So they're really an important thing for me. So we talk about the vertical configuration. One thing I like about having my brood factories in a divided Langstroth 10-frame hive with nuke supers above them, I have 2 queens laying in the same footprint as one 10-frame Langstroth. So if I were to just use my larger colonies, my 10-frame Langstroth colonies, or possibly honey producers, I've only got 1 queen laying in the footprint of a Langstroth, of a 10-frame Langstroth, or 8-frame, or whatever you have, where with the brood factories that I run, I have 2 queens laying in the same footprint. So I think that's a real benefit. Also, the ease of handling, the weight, to pull brood out of production colonies that are actually making a honey crop in order to satisfy your need for frames of brood and bees. You know, you're going to be lifting a lot of weight. I'll show you in a minute. But so, you know, the heaviest thing in a brood factory with a 4 comb box is about 25 pounds, possibly 30, but always way less than that. So, you know, anybody can do this. They're real light. So what do we use them for? Well, we use them for boosting weak colonies. If a colony is struggling and you know, they need some help, well, we give them frames of emerging brood, and it boosts the population really quickly. Or if we want to make cell builders, we strengthen the cell builders with frames of emerging brood that come from the brood factories. And we build these enormous colonies, and I'll have photos in a minute. Or for starting our nucleus colonies. So we made 350 some nucleus colonies this year. All of the brood came from brood factories. Nothing came from honey production colonies. I want my honey production colonies to be honey production colonies, not to be donors for cell builders or nucleus colonies or whatever. I need to make that honey crop. So that's why I went this way. So boosting weak or slow colonies. So right at this time of year, at the beginning of dandelions, I want a colony of bees that's a honey producer to have 8 or 10 frames of brood, not 9. I think 9 is optimum, but I want 8 to 10 frames of brood. Yes, there's colonies that have even more than that. There's colonies that wind up with 10 and 12 frames of brood at dandelion. And those are often too strong, and those need to be adjusted. But there's plenty of colonies that are slow, that only have 3 or 4 frames of brood when they should have way more than that. So I want those to be honey producers. Well, by the time they have enough population to produce a honey crop, it's almost too late. They've already missed half the flow. You know, they're not built up to full strength until way later in June, beginning of July. Then they're starting to get into a full population. By that time, half the honey crop is done. You're in Pennsylvania. Yours ends sooner than mine. My main honey crop is done around July 15th at the end of Linden and Basswood. I don't know about yours. Is yours about the same? I'm not sure. I know the farther south you go, the sooner it ends. By the end of June, you're done. So I call those bee bombs. If you harvested a number of frames of brood from brood factories, emerging brood, and you put it in a box and you put it on the bottom board underneath a slow colony, say that had 3 or 4 frames of brood. When those numbers, 5, 6, 7, how many combs you think you need, emerge, think of the population that you've just boosted that weak, slow colony to, you know, almost to production level. There is an issue. Why are they only 3 or 4 frames of brood? I always blame the queen. I don't think there's anything else we can do but blame the queen. So along with boosting a slow colony with brood to build the population so it can be a productive colony, at some point in the near future, that colony needs to be requeened. So requeening needs to go along with that. But you've built the population. You're not asking this poor thing to build its own population. And that really, really helps a lot. And imagine, this is what I'm talking about. Adding combs of brood like this that are about to emerge or are emerging. I mean, you're adding pounds and pounds to this slow colony. And all that brood comes from brood factories. What about strengthening cell builders? You know, to me, a cell builder has to be overflowing with nurse bees. And that's how you do it. So the photograph on the left is a cell builder after it's been set up on what I call day one, on setup day. So my standard brood nest is 2 deeps and a medium. And that medium can be anywhere in the stack. I don't care where it is. I'm going for cavity size. A cavity size of that much gives me in the fall, gives the colony ample room to store honey for winter above and raise a strong cluster of bees for winter below. So that's why I don't have just a double deep. And then about this time of year, late April, right in the beginning of first week of June, of May, I add 2 medium supers, extracting supers of drawn comb. So that they have somewhere to store the incoming dandelion, fruit bloom, nectar. Then on the day I set up the cell builders, I take off one of those supers. And now the top super often has a lot of nectar, a lot of honey, even capping honey, maybe a little brood. I try not to have too much brood in there. And no queen, absolutely not a queen. And I elevate it over a queen excluder. And then on top of that, I add a box of brood harvested from the brood factories. So in this box would be 2 frames of honey, 1 on each sidewall. And in between the honey would be 7 frames of emerging brood and bees. I mean, emerging. So either you see them actively emerging, as the photograph I've been showing you, with an opening in the middle where some have emerged, and then there's emerging bees all around the opening. Or you pop open some of the cappings in the center of the comb in different places and see how old the pupae are. If the pupae are purple eye, those aren't old enough. You can't take that to be used as emerging brood. If they're getting body color, then they're going to be emerging tomorrow or later today. So that's a good comb. So you can use that one. And then we wait 10 days. The reason we wait 10 days is, number one, to give that emerging brood time to emerge. Nurse bees are 10 or 12 days old approximately. So I'm waiting 10 days. So all those bees that are emerging, at least early in the process, are going to be nurse bees. Also, if I wait 10 days, there are no larvae in there. Anything that was eggs or young larvae has already been sealed over, already been capped. So there are no larvae in there to draw nurse bees from what I want them to draw the queen cells. So we wait 10 days, and then after 10 days, we remove the medium and the deep above the queen excluder, wiggle the queen right hive back on the ground and turn it 180 degrees, facing it backwards. Put a new bottom on the stand in the original location and locate the medium and the deep above on the bottom board. This unit becomes the cell builder. Then we shake the core of the brood nest out of the queen right colony through a queen excluder box. You see in the back with my smoker, that's a shaker box. It's just a hive body with a queen excluder nailed on the bottom. So we shake the core of the brood nest through that box into that deep and that medium. And then we come back in the afternoon, and in 2 or 3 hours we come back. So remember, now they've got the field bees because this cell building unit is now on the bottom board facing in the original direction. So not only do you get the core of the brood nest, which is the bulk of the nurse bees in the colony, but you also get the field bees. And so they get all the resources coming in from the field to feed them. And then you come back in the afternoon, 2 or 3 hours later, and this is what you find. The thing is absolutely overflowing with bees. I mean, there's so many nurse bees in that colony. You know, and the quality of the queen cells, and therefore the quality of the queen, in my opinion, is determined by how much royal jelly was fed to the larvae and the pupae. And you know, how do you fix that? Well, by increasing the number of nurse bees, as I do it, by adding emerging brood 10 days earlier. Well, when everything is clicking right and you're on a flow and they got a nice pollen comb and they're just boiling over with nurse bees, these are the kind of queen cells you get. You get really enormous queen cells that are still full of jelly, even on day 10, after graft, when you add them to the mating nukes, they still have leftover jelly, which to me means they had more jelly than they needed. So they can gorge themselves as far as they want and not run out of feed. So how do you maximize the amount of royal jelly in a queen cell? The nurse bee population is increased by adding combs of emerging brood to the cell builder. Now you can do it the traditional way of a swarm box starter queen right finisher. So you use donor colonies and you harvest nurse bees and you add them to a swarm box, and after 24 hours you add a graft, and then you leave it in there for 24 hours or 36 hours, and they start the cells, and then you transfer those cells into a finisher, which is a strong queen right colony with a queen excluder on top, and above is brood and bees, and you draw nurse bees up, you put the grafted cells in there, they finish the cells. So it's a swarm box starter queen right finisher. I really like my method better because I think I get consistently bigger cells. But anyway, so where does the brood come from? From raising all these cell builders? Of course, it comes from brood factories. The same thing. How about starting nucleus colonies? You know, we raised 352 nucleus colonies this year. All of them came from brood factories. All of them got queens raised from cell builders that were boosted by brood factories. There's something about this, you know, growing queen cells in such optimal conditions and then not shipping them off somewhere, you know, not buying them in from somewhere, and using them within a couple of days of harvest to make nucleus colonies. Out of the 352 nucleus colonies that we started, we gave a queen, a caged queen, with the cork off the candy end. I only lost 4 queens, so 248 nucleus colonies accepted their queens, which is, you know, I think is really good. There's a lot of issues now about queens not getting accepted, queens not lasting very long. Well, I don't know about that, but we have plenty of queens that last 3 years, plenty of them. So as I go on, I'm going to try to talk about managing the brood factories, how they expand, how we treat them, how we harvest emerging brood. And so I have some slides where I will set up the nucleus colonies and show what we do and how we expand them. And each comb has a template of a different color. So honey would be yellow, emerging brood is lavender, cap brood is blue, etc. mixed brood, nectar, pollen, empty combs, or foundation. So it's easy to see, you know. And this is a basic nucleus colony, double nuke in a divided 10 frame box. The gray in the middle is the divider. And this is how we set them up. This is the very beginning. When we set them up, they get a frame of honey, a frame of mixed brood, you know, open brood, eggs, capped brood, some emerging, whatever it is, it's mixed brood, and a frame of capped brood and an empty comb, and enough bees to cover the brood and onto the honey. And we make whole apiaries of these things. So these were all made up probably on the same day, given their queens. I've pulled the queen cages, made sure the queens were laying, and I pulled the cages and given them another story so they can expand, because these nucleus colonies will absolutely explode faster than you realize. So I have to keep on them. I'm adding this second box around day 10 after the setup. So, I mean, you have to be right on it, day 10, because by that time the queen has been released and there are lots of eggs, and they're not, if a queen was rejected, there would still be emergency cells, but they haven't emerged yet. So you don't have to look for virgins. And you can requeen the ones that fail. But, you know, like I said, we only had 4 that failed like that. But, you know, we make whole apiaries of, you know, dedicated to nucleus colonies. And where does the brood come from? Of course, it's the same thing. It all comes from brood factories. So how I got started with brood factories? Well, I mean, I didn't always have brood factories as such, but I needed brood for starting cell builders and creating nucleus colonies. And where do I obtain that brood? You know, I could go to my production hives. So here's a nice colony, a nice apiary of production hives. They got a pretty nice honey crop on. You know, we're about mid-June to early July. I need brood and bees. So for instance, in the first hive here on the right, number 7, well, they got 4 medium supers on. Pretty likely most of these are going to be full. So you mean I'm going to take 4 medium supers off full of honey and take a couple frames of brood and a frame of honey out of this with the bees, replace it with empty comb or foundation if I haven't got any empty comb, and put 150 pounds of honey back on the hive. Oh, I did that great. I always did that when I was 35. That's not going to happen anymore. You know, now I'm 70 something. No, it's not going to happen. It's too much work. You know, I would rather let these bees produce honey than try to, you know, harvest a little brood and bees here and there. And no, it's too much work and it takes too much time. Well, it didn't take me long to realize that I have a number of non-productive colonies in the apiaries. So here this colony is, got a deep and a super, probably a medium. And, you know, and they're obviously on a good honey flow. Well, this is kind of late in the season, but I just wanted an example. This is actually, look, the sumacs are changing color already. So this must be September, I don't know. But anyway, earlier in the season, mid-June to mid-July, I would take these colonies, I would sacrifice them. I would get rid of the old queen. I would use all the bees and brood in those non-productive hives, colonies, and make nucleus colonies out of them and get rid of them. You know, that was a pretty good plan. You know, I could make 3 or 4 nucleus colonies out of the one of these non-productives. And, you know, the traditional method of handling these colonies would be to requeen it. Or maybe give it brood and then requeen it. Well, just because you did that doesn't mean it's going to live through the winter. So I found that it was better to use the resources now of these non-productive hives and make a few nucleus colonies and winter them. And I always had better luck at wintering, 3 or 4 nucleus colonies as opposed to one non-productive colony that we're trying to salvage. But I didn't have enough. Eventually, I didn't have enough non-productive hives, colonies. As my need to make more nucleus colonies grew, I would run out of non-productive colonies. So then what could I do? Well, I winter so many nucleus colonies, and there's always strong ones and weak ones. So I looked at sacrificing the weak colonies. So here's one that's not as strong as the one on the left is booming, just boiling with bees. The one on the right isn't so, there's empty space here. It's not quite as strong. So this is an example. Okay, this is just an example. This is back when I used to use a movable division board feeder as the divider. And the bees can't cross around it or under it, and they can't cross over it because of the bag. So I would remove the strong nucleus colony and either use it where I need it or sell it. And this movable feeder could be moved over to the sidewall, and 4 more combs could be given to the weaker colony. And they would expand onto those combs and build a unit that I could actually use and sacrifice for making nucleus colonies. This is one of the reasons why, one of the ways that I observed the difference between vertical and horizontal, because I try to expand these nucleus colonies sideways, horizontally. And they would get over, they'd have 4 new combs here, and they would get over a couple of combs and then there would be 1 or 2 almost empty combs out here. And they didn't see those combs way over there on the side as expansion room. And so they'd start swarm preparations. And so that was an indication to me of the value of vertical configuration. But I had to learn this still. It took me years to learn this, and seeing so many of these things swarm from scum that, that's when I got the idea of vertical. But also these weak overwintered nucleus colonies, it could be the queen. Okay. So the queen wasn't up to par, and she just couldn't raise a good colony of bees. So we'd get what we could from her, and then we'd sacrifice it and get rid of her and use the brood and bees. Well, too many times there was something like chalk brood involved, and so there'd be these colonies expanding chalk brood, and they'd be stinky rotten with chalk brood, and I couldn't use them anyway. So using the weak ones wasn't really a good idea. There's too many issues with weak ones. Well, what about sacrificing the strong overwintered colonies as the brood source? Well, that worked very well. Look at the population of this thing. Obviously, you got a good queen. You got healthy bees. That population, they aren't even unwrapped yet. Okay, this is probably, April in northern Vermont, northern New York. So, they really can explode. And so that's what I did then. I started with strong overwintered nuclei. This is at dandelion. You see the dandelion blooms in the back. The grass hasn't been cut. I'm thinking mid-May here. Well, look at the populations that they've already built. It's pretty amazing how fast these nucleus colonies expand. And so in 2011, which was really the first year that I experimented with something I could call a brood factory. Excuse me, I've been getting over a cold from my grandchildren. I started with 50 overwintered nucleus colonies. And starting on May 9th, I started harvesting brood from them to set up cell builders. May 9th is my traditional day to set up cell builders. That gives me my first queens on June 13th, and it gives my help July 4th off. So it's a pretty workable plan. So between May 9th and June 19th, I harvested 245 frames of brood, and I stocked 35 cell builders. Then in June 16th, well, our first queens are available on the 13th of June. So the 16th of June, I have a bunch of queens to be used. I change over to making nucleus colonies. So between June 16th and July 20th, I harvested brood from these 50 overwintered nucleus colonies. And eventually I took them right down to nothing. I used everything they can, all the bees, all the brood, and they disappeared. But I made 330 nucleus colonies, which is pretty amazing. I never did it again. I never was able to reach that level again in per brood factory nucleus colonies made. But I changed my plan a little bit. The 50 nucleus colonies were sacrificed, so they were gone. They could have been used next year and the next year if I can get them to be perennial and to overwinter. So in a way, that was kind of wasteful to do it that way. So the following year, in 2012, I came up with a more conservative and sustainable plan. You know, I started with apiaries of strong nuclei, and this is what they would look like in the overwintered double nuclei in the spring. There were, at the time, I kept them in 3 stories. And, you know, this isn't how everyone is. I mean, they vary. They vary from, you know, number of frames of brood, cluster size, how much honey they have. Some of them don't have hardly any honey left and they need to be fed. Some of them got way too much honey, and you can give a comb of honey to here and there and whatever where it's needed. But this is sort of typical. You know, the one on the left has 3 frames of cap brood and a frame of mixed brood and enough honey they got no problem. They got enough to get them through until dandelion. The one on the right has 5 frames of brood. It's got 2 capped and 3 mixed. So they're expanding, right? They're expanding their brood nest. They're increasing the combs of brood. They've only got 1 frame of honey. So depending on when the flow starts, if they get down any less than that 1 frame of honey, we might give them a little syrup. If it's warm enough, if it's late enough, if it's this time of year. If it's March, we might have to give them fondant because they can't fly. But this is typical. They vary. Of course they do. They're individuals. All individuals of a species vary. So you can't expect them all to be the same. So now we have to add comb to the expanding nuclei. You know, we're trying to build them up so that they can make more frames of brood. So if I were to add to this colony back here, right, these double nukes, if I were to add a 3rd story to them, and I was using empty comb, you know, drawn worker comb, brood comb, and I added the 3rd story on top, and I put the 4 empty combs in there, and that was good, right? Well, maybe not. You know, you're trying to get them to fill combs of brood, but if you put 4 empty combs on top of this unit during a honey flow, chances are they're gonna put nectar in a lot of those combs, and you're not going to get the extra frames of brood that you need. So rather, let me explain something. So this divider between the double nuke box is actually the center of the brood nest of a double nuke box. So what do I mean? If you were to look at overwintered nucleus colonies, and when it's still cold out, you'll see that they don't have two individual clusters, one here and one here. They have one cluster, one big cluster like this, like that. They have one big cluster with the divider as the center between the cluster, between the two sides of the cluster. So they're making semicircle clusters, this one like that, this one like that. I'm not the first one to notice this. It was so obvious when we first started wintering nucleus colonies, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, that you open them up in the spring and said, look at that. They've got like semicircle clusters, you know. And so C.C. Miller, if you know C.C. Miller, 50 years among the bees and whatever, comb honey expert in the probably the 1880s to about 1920 when he passed away. He said that he devised a hive where it had two nucleus colonies with a divider. And he said that they formed one cluster as if the divider was shoved down between it. Well, he wrote that in 1891. As I said in the beginning, there's no difference. What happened in the beginning is happening now. The same issues, we have the same issues and the same solutions. It's just we forgot all this stuff. And now we have to relearn it. So rather than putting 4 empty combs on top of this double story nuke, we're going to remove the 2 frames that were here and put them in an empty box and add our 2 empty combs there against the divider, because that's the center of the brood nest. And that's where the queen is going to jump right on these combs and lay. And so now, if you look at the setup of those 2 empty combs, you got capped brood next to it. You got brood below it, you got brood above it, and that just becomes her center and her core. And she goes right there and starts to lay, making you frames of brood, making you combs of brood. And then the other 2 get put up top, you know, and of course they're going to put nectar in there, but they have to have overhead storage of nectar anyway. But it's important that you get a couple of these combs right here in the core of the brood nest, so you entice her to lay in them. And the other one is the same way. I mean, if we went back to that and we look at the brood mix and then we come to this, you can see what I've done. And you can see that the empty combs in the center box against the divider are surrounded by brood above and to the side and below. And that just entices her to lay right there. And then the 2 empty combs, for instance, this one, remember this one had an empty extra frame of honey. Okay, that's on the outside now, but this one didn't. And so you'll see in one of the next slides, you know, being up on the top, on the outside, is going to encourage them to store nectar there. But that's really what you want, overhead nectar storage. You don't want it going in the brood. You want it going up above and out of the way. Now I want to get rid of the nuke on the left. You know, it's too much to look at. It's overload. So we'll just concentrate on one. So this is the same slide as I expanded the double nuke up, added the empty comb, same slide. And this is going to follow us for a while. And so we make whole apiaries with these things, expanding them up. Some of them need 4. By midsummer, some of them will need 5 stories high, even though we're pulling brood out of them regularly. They still build population. They still get too crowded. They still can swarm if we're not on them all the time. So this is the comb. This is the same slide. the same nuke. This is how we expanded the brood nest into a third story. This is a slide of my help harvesting brood, looking for the queen, making sure we don't take the queen when we're harvesting brood. And we store temporarily, we store the frames of emerging brood with no queens in a shaker box, in an excluded hive body. And they don't all come from the same brood factory. They come from, if we take one frame from this one and 2 frames from that one and a frame from that one and 3 from that one, because they're starting queen cells, and we mix them all together. They don't fight. They do not fight. So yeah, they're a cell builder with 7 frames that we're adding 7 frames of brood from might come from 4 different colonies. It's okay. They don't fight. I leave the bees right on the frames. They get along. So these are 3-story brood factories that I'm getting ready to harvest from. So the one on the left, you see the one on the left the one on the left, I take the top box off and I put it on the next double nuke box on a cover. And I take the middle one off and I put it next to that. And so I know where everybody is, top, middle, bottom. Now I want to harvest brood from this. And so how many frames of brood will this brood factory give me? Well, what do I need right now? Is it early season? Am I starting cell builders and I only need emerging brood? Yeah, maybe so. So I look for emerging brood. Well, the first place I look, of course, is these 3 combs right here, these 2 combs right here, right? This is the center of her brood rearing cluster. So we look at those. So we may have to look at this one. If we don't find what we want there, well, maybe we'll go down below. Sometimes you find emerging brood down here. Once in a while, you'll find it up here, but more often it's honey. But we still need a frame of honey. So if a cell builder gets 2 frames of honey and 7 frames of emerging brood, well, maybe I get one of my frames of honey right here. And 2 frames of brood, right? Maybe that one and that one, or that one and that one are emerging. And then I replace it with empty comb. I put it in my holding box, and then we go to the next one. And the reason this one has a bag on it, you see all the way over there on the right, it's got a grain bag. Well, that's because at the time when we expanded upwards, this one wasn't strong enough. So we put a grain bag there and an empty box. And the whole idea is so that we can keep the lid level. Not going to be any spaces here. It's all going to be level and sealed. So then we take that one apart and look, the population is starting to grow. So maybe we get something, maybe we don't, but then we have to add another story of 4 combs. And again, we might take out these two combs, elevate them into a top box, put 2 empty combs of brood combs there of empty comb, and put that on, and then put the top box on, and put those 2 combs that we elevated against the divider, and then put 2 empty combs on the outside of the 3rd box up. So that's how we're pretty much doing it. And we're going through these about, it takes maybe 10 days to 2 weeks to get back. And the idea is to pull enough brood out so they don't start swarm cells before we get back there, but not so much that they'll dwindle and they have a hard time filling in new combs of brood. So this is the same one, the same picture that we expanded onto 3. Again, over there on the left, it's the same photograph. I just don't want to have to go back and forth. And if you look at, what's going on here. So in the top box, remember we elevated a couple of frames of brood when we added a third story. Well, the capped brood in the top emerged before we got back. And as they emerged, she relayed in it. And so now you got eggs and young larvae and whatever. The mixed brood was sealed, and now it's starting to emerge. So now it's labeled an emerging brood frame. The two empties that we put up on top, well, now they're nectar or honey, which is exactly what you would expect. The two empty combs that we put in the middle box against the divider are now mixed brood, but the mixed brood got sealed and starts to emerge, and now you have an emerging. So there's two frames of emerging here. Well, but there's also an extra honeycomb, because they don't need 3 frames of honey. They're on a flow. They don't need 3 frames of honey. So we take 2 frames of emerging and a frame of honey, and we use it where it needs to be. And then we add empty comb to where whatever we pulled out, and she'll lay in that eventually. We want to replace it. We usually replace it early in the season with brood comb, empty brood comb. And so that's what we've done here. We've replaced what we took, the honey and the 2 emergings, we replaced it with empty comb. Okay. Now adding foundation. If you want to add foundation because you ran out of comb. Now understand that adding foundation in most cases is going to slow down the process. The queen she doesn't like to lay in new comb in foundation as much as she likes to lay in nice, dark, clean worker brood, worker comb, brood comb. She likes that better. So it can slow down the process if you're using foundation, but you have to use what you have to use, right? So we're going to expand this up to a 4th story, but this time we have to use foundation. Well, it's pretty much the same thing as using empty comb. You have this, you put your 2 foundations against the divider and the other 2 on the outside up here, so on the top box, so that they'll draw it out and put nectar in it. Now, a little story. So I go to Mexico every so often, and I work with a group of folks down there that are just absolutely wonderful. And my friend and translator, he's really a good beekeeper, and he knows my work and he knows my operation. And so I'm explaining to him about how I put the 2 foundations here and the other 2 foundations there. And he thinks for a minute and he says, "Oh, you mean zigzag?" Exactly. So now we've got the term down there that adding combs or adding foundations in zigzag. And that's exactly what it is. So, whatever it takes for people to understand. If they need to have me say zigzag, well, good. He likes that. He likes to say zigzag. I love the guy and I love the people there. It's amazing. But anyway, and so at the same time, we're expanding them up with foundation. Gosh, we found 2 more emerging frames of brood. So, okay, we pull those emerging frames of brood out, and we replace that with empty comb or what have we. Empty comb now, if I have it, because we're really overloading them with foundation, anything more than 4 at first at one time. And then they do it again. And it happens again, and it repeats itself. The 2 foundations are now nectar or honey. The mixed brood in the top box is capped. The capped brood emerged. Now we're on a pretty good flow. And she's not going to lay in there. They're going to fill that with nectar faster than she can lay in there. So now it's a nectar pollen comb. The foundations become mixed brood. The empty comb that I added becomes, this is a couple weeks later, becomes mixed brood. The mixed brood becomes emerging. So here we go again. Now we can take 2 more frames of maybe, or a couple more frames of emerging brood, or maybe some honey and some emerging brood. Or if we're making nucleus colonies, if it's, you know, say around June 15th, after we have queens, maybe we don't need emerging brood. We need mixed brood, a frame of honey, a frame of mixed brood, and a frame of capped brood, and maybe an empty comb. So we have an empty comb out of storage, and we have a capped brood, and we have a mixed brood, and we harvest that, and that becomes a nucleus colony. And so we do this constantly all the way from May 9th until about, I think the last cell builders are set up June 30th, perhaps. So we're harvesting emerging brood for cell builders, and after that it's 100% for nucleus colonies. And so this is a brood factory yard, and it's, you know, it's getting built up well. It's in 4s and 5s now. You know, even though we're pulling brood out, we're not depopulating them. They still have emerging brood that we miss, that isn't emerging the day we're there, and 10 days later it's emerged. So they're still building population. So you can't leave them in 2 or 3 stories high because they'll swarm. So you need to add another story or 2 more stories if necessary. Now, this white line is the inner cover. And the nucleus colony on the left of the stack is really good. And they had to be built up from 3 and 4, and then now into 5 stories. The one on the right isn't as strong. They're not building up as rapidly. And as in before, when I showed you, I'll put the inner cover here, put an empty box on top, just so I can have my lid be level and close everything up. But yeah, these things get really, really strong in a hurry. It's amazing how fast they'll get out of control. So you have to be on these things all the time. And about, well, if I start on May 9th, my first queen catch is May 13th, June 13th. And then shortly after that, maybe the 15th, we start making nucleus colonies for overwintering. So we usually have 60, or I don't know, we usually get up around 90 to, we've changed from 4-way mating nukes to 2-ways, and we're getting a better take. So we might get anywhere from 90 to 100 queens every 4 days. So we're making nucleus colonies every 4 days. I sell some queens. I try to keep 60 for myself. We try to make 50 to 60 nucleus colonies every 4 days. So we got to get it done. You know, we've got to get this work done. Our season is rapidly progressing. Our flow will be done July 15th at the end of Linden Basswood. If we make them too long after July 4th, by the time they build enough population, the flow has ended and they can't draw foundation. They just struggle. And even though we make the nucleus colonies that we make after, say, July 4th, we make them with 3 frames of brood instead of 2 frames of brood, they still have issues. So our sweet spot is June 15th to about July 4th. So we have to we're making 300 or something more, 350 or something more than that in a month, in less than a month, in 3 weeks. We're trying to get this done. And, you know, it's a struggle, especially with weather. And so then we start making nucleus colonies. So way over here on the left are 4 typical nucleus colonies that I've set up with a honey, a mixed brood, a cap brood, and an empty comb, and bees to cover the brood and onto the honey. And so here's over on the left, here's a 4-story nucleus colony brood factory that we've built up into 5. And they're on a flow, so they're storing more honey up above. I mean, you can see the progression. So once they get to this level, maybe we're starting to make nucleus colonies, and we don't replace all the combs that we pull out for nucleus colonies. For instance, here are 4 nucleus colonies that we're making up. Each needs a comb of honey. Okay, so this brood factory has 2 supers of honey on it. Let's take one off. Use the honey as the honey frames in the new nucleus colonies. And then we need a frame of mixed and a frame of capped and an empty for each one. Okay, so then we go down below and we say, well, what can we get from this brood factory? Can we get a couple of frames of brood? Can we get a mixed and a capped? Maybe we'll get more. Maybe we'll get 2 mixed and a capped and a honey. So okay, fine. And then we'll replace it with empty comb, or later in the season with empty foundation. And that's pretty much what we do, you know. And so, you know, and you go down the rows. I mean, I've got 3 apiaries of brood factories. And you start at the first one and you go down the rows. And when you're done, when you've taken what you need for the day, you know, you write on the cover, start here and the date. And then 4 days later, we're back there again, pulling more brood. We'll go back down around, up and down the rows and do the same thing. And then start here, or now we're into one of the other yards. And then eventually we get back to the first yard again. And we start at the beginning and we start doing the same thing. And we create whole apiaries of these nucleus colonies. You know, I have a lot of these apiaries of nucleus colonies. There might be, I don't know, there might be 50 or more nucleus colonies in every one of them. And they do fine. I mean, nucleus colonies don't take that much resource to build up. Now, this is how I keep my records. I use duct tape on the cover, on the lid. And so, for instance, this brood factory was looked at on March 22nd of 2001. And just a cursory examination says they're both okay, which means they have a decent population and they have enough honey to get them by, and we don't have to look any deeper. Then in April, I don't know what that says. I got a smudge here going, but the one on the left had 8 frames of bees, and the one on the right had 4 frames of bees. Well, the one on the right is definitely lagging behind the one on the right. Then on May 13th of 2001, it turned 8 frames of bees into 8 frames of brood. So we took one away that seemed appropriate at the time. You know, of course, I can't remember. And it had a green dot queen. So we know what the queen is. So if we find a queen in there that's not a green dot, we know they either superseded or swarmed or something. The one on the right turned their 4 frames of bees into 5 frames of brood, which isn't bad, but it's not like that other one. And whoever was that looked at this colony at the time decided, well, the brood pattern didn't look great, or they're lagging behind or something. Let's give them a new queen. Well, we don't have new queens available till the 14th, till the 13th of June. And once we have queens available, it's way more important to use them for making nucleus colonies and get that done by July 4th or 10th or whatever, than it is to requeen that colony. So twice it was noted, requeen this colony. And on the 18th, we added the 5th box on May 18th to the nuke on the left. Then on June 14th, you know, we're taking frames of brood out. That means -2 frames of brood. But the one on the right seems to be building up pretty well now, you know. So we left them alone. We haven't pulled anything out at all. And we had to take 4 frames of brood out of them. Well, they probably still only got 3 or 4 stories high, whereas the other one had 5. So it had more combs for the colony to be on. So we had to do something. I bet you this thing was starting cells, or it looked too crowded. So we took 4 frames of brood out of it. It also had a green dot queen. On the 23rd of June, we took 3 frames of brood and a frame of honey from the left, and 3 frames of brood and a frame of honey on the right. So this one has come around, and it's sort of getting approaching the strength of the one on the left. And you can see on July 5th, we took 1.5 nukes out of each. So then we're finished making nukes around, say, the 10th of July. And after we're done making nucleus colonies, then we have excess queens, and we use them for requeening nucleus brood factories, requeening production hives. Anything that needs a new queen gets a new queen. We don't requeen everything every year or every 2 years by the calendar. We requeen by performance. And so, yes, on the 20th of July, the one on the right was requeened with a daughter of breeder 84, and she was mated in 21. And that number will follow this queen, 8421. So we always know where she came from. Then in mid-November, you know, harvest is done. It's time to feed, or at least evaluate how much food they have for winter. And I would say this brood factory is up on the north end of my range, you know, up by the Canada border. We had a drought last summer that was a killer drought. Oh, I mean, gosh, no goldenrod flow at all. You know, everything was wicked light. Almost everything was wicked light. We had to feed these 2 nucleus colonies, these 2 brood factories, 3 gallons of syrup, 3 gallons of 2-to-1. You know, usually it's 0, 1, and maybe 2. Occasionally you get one that has 3. Some of these yards up north, nuke yards, they needed 3. All of them needed 3. It was really incredible. Well, we did it, you know. Up above, it's an indication of how much did we take any honey away from these brood factories. So remember, this one was a 5th story eventually, but whatever, we took one of those away full of honey, and we got about 25 pounds, an estimate, but just an indication of that one made some honey. This one did not, but this one got requeened. So how we requeen? We requeen with push-in cages. If you've never used a push-in cage to requeen a queen ride colony, I'll tell you what, it's the way to go. So we have an 8 mesh hardware cloth cage that's got 5 sides on it, right? 4 and 1 is 5. And the size can vary. It's about the size of a 3x5 card, something like that. And so you find a comb in the colony to be requeened that has emerging brood. It has to be emerging, and some nectar cells around the emerging brood. And you brush all the bees off the comb, and you locate the push-in cage over where you're going to be able to get nectar and emerging brood. You hold the queen by the wings. Now, if you're worried about it, if you haven't done this before, you go sit in your car, or you do it in front of a window in your house or your honey house or something. And so if the queen gets away, she flies against the window and you can get her again. But anyway, so you let the queen go underneath there. There's no bees under there. And you put that back in the middle. You push that cage into the midrib. You want to try to keep it away from wood. This one, I believe, is too close to the bottom bar. The cells are often shallower along the side and the bottom bars. And they'll burrow under it and let her out too soon. So anyway, we leave it in there for 4 days. Let me see, what's my next slide? Okay. We leave it in there for 4 days. And you can see the bees. There's the queen, the red dot. You can see all the bees under the cage. Those didn't come in from the outside of the cage. Those emerged. Those are very young bees that just emerged in the last couple of days. They've never seen a queen. They don't know any other queen but this one. And they groom her and they feed her. And now the reason we do this, so if you're going to requeen a hive of bees, what do? Get rid of the queen and put in your shipping cage with the cork off the candy end. Okay. Now you're removing a laying queen from a queen right colony, and you're asking them to accept a non-laying queen. And what do I mean by that? I'm not saying non-mated. I'm saying non-laying. So when I catch queens and put them in a cage with attendants and I put them on my table, as I showed you that photograph, they're nice, fat, plump queens. I evaluate every queen we produce. If she's a little skinny runt thing, I destroy her. I only accept good full-size queens. Okay, so they're nice and plump. They got a big fat abdomen, and you put them in a cage on a table overnight, and you look at them in the morning, and they're all shrunk up. They're not plump anymore. They're not laying anymore. They've shut down. And so you're going to ask a colony with a laying queen that you removed to take this queen that's not laying? Yeah, some of them do. Lots of them do, but too many of them don't. And so what we're doing is we're bringing this queen back into lay. Once she's the laying queen, I mean, she acts like a laying queen to the bees, and they don't see any difference between their old queen and this queen. It's, if you get a chance to read Brother Adams' little periodical about introducing queen bees and see how he introduced queen bees, oh my gosh, he could introduce, he'd have a hive to be requeened. Okay. He'd go to the mating nuke and pull out the queen and put her in a cage and put her in his pocket. He'd go to the hive that needed to be requeened. He'd pull the old queen out and put her in a cage in the other pocket. He'd let the queen go that he just pulled out of the mating nuke into the colony that needed to be requeened. And then he'd take the old queen back to the mating nuke, and he'd let her go in the mating nuke. And she'd stay there until he had queen cells available. Then he'd get rid of her and add queen cells. Well, they accepted them almost all the time. I know people in the UK that follow his requeening plan and have very good success. There's none of this put the cage in the colony for days and let them be queenless for such and such a time, and then you cut out the emergency cells, and no, it's like a boom, boom, done. So it's not about the queen taking on the colony odor, or they're getting used to her smell or this. No, it's how she acts. So anyway, if you can find that, I believe Northern Bee Books has a copy of it. It's very interesting to read. It's only a pamphlet. It's very cheap. But anyway, so one of the reasons, why do we leave it 4 days? Well, we leave it 4 days for a very specific reason. So you pull this comb out that's got the queen under the cage, and you look at the cells outside the cage. Are there any eggs? Sometimes there are eggs outside the cage. Well, you removed the old queen. What happened? There's multiple queens in this hive. And that happens when you requeen with a shipping cage. You remove the first queen you find, you put the shipping cage in marked with a marked queen, And then you come back there X days later to see how she's doing, and there's an unmarked queen. That's because there was another queen in the hive. So if there are eggs outside the cage on day 4, you have to repeat it, or you have to find that old queen and get rid of her too, that queen number 2. There's a lot of, I've seen over 50% of my colonies have multiple queens. So it's not uncommon. So we've determined there's no eggs outside the cage. There's bees inside the cage taking care of her. The bees on the outside of the cage are feeding her. They're walking about lightly. You can push them over with your fingers. You can move them out of your way. If they haven't accepted that queen, they're going to be on that cage like Velcro. And it's almost like ripping Velcro when you pull them off. If you pull them off by their wings, then they have not accepted that queen. That's a rare thing, and that only happens when there's multiples. So you pull the cage off, and this is like what, a minute, less than a minute after I pull the cage off, just a fumble so I can take a photograph. Look at the retinue already. The retinue is already there in a minute. So they've definitely, look at her. She's plumped up again. That's how we requeen. So after making nucleus colonies, and after doing some requeens, we're going to be into the autumn flow of goldenrod and aster. So if the stack on the left looks like this, we've got some foundation in there because I run out of combs at the end of the year as well. But we're going to be on a goldenrod flow. And so the top box is already honey, and the next box down, we hope, is now honey from goldenrod and aster. And even down below into the third box down, you're going to have some honey because the foundation got drawn out and filled up, and the cap brood emerged and got filled up. And so now we've got something like 1, 2, 3, 4 combs of brood. But we can take that top box off. We don't need, I winter in 3. So I can take that top box off and then evaluate the colony for how much more feed it needs for winter. But you can see, if you look at the bottom 3 boxes here, look how much honey they've already got. So they probably need 2 boxes of honey, maybe a little down here. So you got a nectar pollen and a nectar pollen. So perhaps this one's going to need to be fed. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's not going to need much. It's already got a box of honey on top and half a box here. If you filled it enough to fill up those two combs right now, he's probably got enough for winter. So this is what we do. We harvest that top box. And we try to leave them, after we have the last harvest of nucleus colonies, we try to leave them with 3 or 4 frames of brood. So while this one's got 5, okay, fine. But we try, and then they'll build back up again. And they'll build a nice population on the fall flow for winter. So of course, once we're done requeening and we're done harvest, and we're in August now, maybe pre goldenrod, because the goldenrod all goes in the brood nest. We don't try to harvest it. We let the bees have it. We have to do something about this pest. This is getting difficult. It's been 30 plus years for me dealing with this. And at first it was like a breeze, and now it's, gosh, no matter what you try, you're going to lose a bunch of bees. Seems like every year. But anyway, we've gone to using oxalic sugar syrup drizzle when they become broodless. And this is going to be about November. Well, the trouble is we have to get them to November healthy to the broodless condition before this is going to be any good at all. And so how do you do that? Well, you know, I, like many, have been using Amatraz for years. It's the only thing that really worked well enough, but it's starting to lose its efficacy. And, you know, I'd like to get away from it. So we're trying to switch over to an oxalic regimen instead of an Amatraz regimen. I'm very interested in the oxalic acid glycerin pads that Randy's been investigating. I know some really credible beekeepers, and they're not just in my climate. They're in Florida, they're in Vermont, they're in New York, that are using oxalic glycerin pads put on early in the season, about when you reverse your hives, at say on the dandelion flow. And then you can put supers on, because it, you know, it's not going to get in the supers. And it helps them maintain a varroa population of near zero. I'd like to know a little more about it. I'd like to hear some more testimonials, etc. But the people that I've been listening to are saying, "Oh my gosh, you know, I mean, they don't, the mites don't build up." Well, that's the idea. If we can get the colonies, you know, production colonies, nucleus colonies, brood factories, if we can get them to the broodless period without them crashing, boy, that's going to be a real plus, I'll tell you, because then we could use oxalic drizzle to control the population, and the colonies won't be so compromised with virus that it doesn't matter what you do. You know, there are a lot of colonies that I don't care what you do. Once the population of varroa gets high enough, it's too late. It's too late. You can kill all the varroa mites you want. It's too late. The viruses wipe the hive. So then once we're done treating, and you know, harvest is done, treating is done, requeening is done, now we have to get them ready for winter. So again, this is the same slide again, but the three and the 3+ up on top, that's pretty scary. And since I can only add 2 gallons at a time, but so this is how I do add 2 gallons at a time. So, you know, each nucleus colony, each brood factory on each side of the double divided deep, you know, has an inner cover, half width inner cover with a feed hole. And I just put 3/8 shims, and then I invert gallon cans that I use as my feeders. The gallon cans, you need to get epoxy lined, like Sherwin-Williams has them. I'm sure other companies have them. They're those gray lined cans, paint cans. Sugar syrup will attack the tin, and it'll eat away the tin, because the sugar syrup, unless you clean it and wash it, it forms an acid, and it will attack the metal. But with the epoxy line, there's no problem with that. And so we can put up to 2 gallons on one of these on these double nukes at once, and they're on the shims, and they meet directly over the feed hole like this. And so we've given each of these 2 brood factories 2 gallons of syrup. Now, if they were marked 3, well, when these syrup cans are empty, we'll take them off, and we'll put a new one right in the middle over the hole, and that'll be their 3rd. They'll take these down. I mean, I love feeding these with gallon cans. The cover, it has holes punched in it, nail holes, about 5 6-penny nail holes, not little pinpricks, the whole nail through the can lid. Invert that over the hole, and boy, they just go up there and take it down. I'm telling you, in a week, those 2 gallons will be gone. And then you can add another one if you need it. I believe when you feed, you should feed the syrup as fast as you can. You don't want to feed it slowly. You like a quart jar, and you put it on there. And then when it's empty, you feed it again, and you put it on there, and you put it on there. And you wind up, after feeding a whole bunch of syrup in quart cans, that there really isn't that much stored down in the combs. Why is that? Because it's coming in so slowly that they're raising brood out of it. But if you put it in fast and you make them suck it down real fast, it acts like a nectar flow. And they just put it in the combs, and they'll even cap it. I've even seen them capping it. So, and then we put a shell around it, an empty shell around it, deep Langstroth or whatever fits your hives. Sometimes there's enough of a crack in this old box, so we put a little tape on it, make sure that we don't get robbing started. So then once we get done feeding, about sometime in November, we start putting the winter wraps on. I use tar paper wraps, just 1 layer of tar paper. I have a 2-inch rigid foam board on top of the inner covers. That insulates the inner covers so that moisture doesn't condense underneath the cover and then drip on the bees and getting them wet, wet bees or dead bees in the winter. Done. That's all it takes. And the wrapping is 15-pound felt tar paper, and it's not insulation. It's black, and it's there for solar gain. So on the coldest winter days, it are usually sunny, and it helps warm the hive up. It warms up the inside. You ought to feel the heat on some of these papers. It's incredible, and it enables the bees to break cluster a little bit. Maybe bring some honey into the core of the brood nest. Clean up a little bit. So it helps wind protection if you're in a windy spot and your hives have holes in them. So this is one of the brood factory yards after the first snow. This is probably, I don't know, beginning of December, end of mid-November, somewhere like that. And so every one of these nucleus colonies, these double nukes, they have entrances at the bottom. So here, the one on the left here, the entrance is down here for this nuke on the right. The entrance for the nuke on the left is around the backside. Well, this starting in early winter. The snow piles up. Pretty soon, the snow is often halfway up the hive or more, and we'll go like this for months. And one of the issues here is how many months the bees have to go without a cleansing flight. We'll sometimes go 4.5 months without a cleansing flight, with the entrances buried under snow. And then you'll get a nice warm period, a couple of days in the 50s or whatever, and it's like cleansing opportunity, but the bottom entrances are buried in the snow, and the bees don't get a cleansing flight. So we have an upper entrance. You see that little upper entrance? That's a 3/4 inch auger hole in the top box. And that allows them to have a cleansing flight if the opportunity arises in the wintertime. But it's also how excess moisture is vented out of the hive. Now, I know that lately, in the last few years, there's been a lot of discussions about upper entrances and insulation. And I would not be without upper entrances, tell you the truth. On a cold morning in midwinter, you go out to the bee yards before the sun is getting warmer, and you'll see horizontal icicles sticking out of that upper entrance. That's how much moisture comes out of these things in the nighttime or all day long, probably. Now, I've never seen an issue with that. I've never seen them be too dry. I've never seen them lack for water. Of course, they need water, but there's plenty of moisture within the hive. It's just the excess moisture. So those are the two reasons why I have upper entrances. So here's the cell building yard. These are the brood factories all wrapped up for winter. To the left would be the 30 plus brood factory colonies and the breeder hives. So we have a number of breeder hives and breeder boxes so that we can graft from them. And those are all collected. They're all selected from the yard sheets that show colonies that are performing the way we want them to perform. So here I'm putting on the wrapper. Actually, we use a double wrapper on these nucleus colonies. So it's really a 78-inch piece of tar paper folded in half lengthwise and cut along the fold. And we use two pieces. It's just easier to take care of it. And then you can see the upper entrance. So I staple the tar papers on. There's the foam. The tar paper comes up near the top of the foam, and the lid gets put on and tied down. I always tie the lids down. Colonies blow over in the wintertime. Covers blow off in the wintertime. But if you tie it down, they don't. So if a colony blows over in the wintertime and the cover falls off, they're dead. If a colony blows over in the wintertime and the cover stays on, even though the bottom board came off, even though this silly hive can be buried in snow, they're going to live. So I tie all the covers down and put a brick on top to ensure that the covers never come off. And then I put a staple next to the upper entrance to keep the tar paper wrap against the hive. And look at this. What has it been? A minute, couple minutes? Look at that. They're already looking out at me. So, this is a cold day. This is a pretty cold day, Yeah, I left my coat on. It's a little sunny, getting sunny, but it's still a cold day. We got long johns on and boots and everything. It's a cold day. But look at that tar paper has warmed up the environment enough. And what's really nice about these tar paper wraps in the springtime, when you have a marginal flight day, cleansing flight day, the tar papers seem to warm up a climate zone right around the hive. And you'll see the bees coming out and having a cleansing flight and not going more than maybe 5 feet away from the hive, and then back onto the paper, get warmed up and go back in the hive. And all the poop is, within say 10 feet of the hive. And out there in the snow away from the hives, there's nothing. There's no dead bees, there's no poops, there's no, so this black tar paper helps in a number of ways. Now, if you're down, do you need to wrap in Lancaster, PA? Doubtful. You could try it. It might help. We get some pretty nasty weather down there as well, but it's something that you would want to experiment with. So in closing, I just want to say, what are we doing with these bees? So we start in the spring, and I winter them in 3 stories now, but it used to be 2. But we build them up into 3, and then we build them up into 4. And if they need it, we build them up even more than that. And we'd be harvesting brood for cell building and adding combs and harvesting more brood for cell building, and then harvesting brood for making nucleus colonies and adding comb or foundation back. But eventually, if they're in 4 or 5 stories high, we want to reduce them down to say 3, 4. So after maybe the second or second round of nucleus colony harvesting, we start to knock them down a story. And then we take them down and we take them down and we count. And on the final split, on the final harvest of brood, we take everything out of them, all the brood out of them that we can use, but leaving them 3 or 4 frames of brood. And we get that down in the bottom box, and they will build up. And with what brood they have, they've already got a good population. And then we winter them. They become perennials. They're perennial brood factories. They're not like in 2011 when I harvest them, when I sacrifice them. So maybe I don't get, 10 nukes from every brood factory as I used to do that year, but I still have my brood factories. So maybe I get 5 or 6 nucleus colonies from each brood factory, plus the queens that I raise from setting up cell builders by harvesting emerging brood from the brood factories. But I can continue to manage them, and I'll have them next year. And so this becomes a perennial side of my apiary, and it's really the most important side of my apiary, because this is the side of my apiary that keeps everything going. Without it, I'd be stuck. In the last 6 years, say, I've had 2 major crashes of varroa mites, a 45% and a 55%. Done. If I didn't have the nucleus colonies to replace them, what would I do? Buy packages? Buy nucleus colonies? I'd be out of business. I'd be done. But because I have these perennial brood factories that have the ability to crank me out frames of brood and make me queens and make me nucleus colonies, this is what's saving my apiary. And this is really what's making my apiary sustainable. So obviously, this is not a single-use resource hive. It's not. It's so much more than a single-use resource hive. You got a small apiary, so you have one double nuke box with a multiple story nuke on either side of it, harvesting brood all the time. Just something simple like using it to boost your honey production hives. How do you make honey production? Well, you have population. You have your population peaking at the time when the honey flow begins, so they can take advantage of it. And how do you do that when you have so many colonies that are just kind of lagging behind all the time? You build them up with frames of emerging brood, as Brother Columba did in 1900. So I think you probably have got it. I think I've said enough, trying to show you the importance in my operation of brood factories. And anyway, all of it comes from brood factories. So thanks for listening. My dog Wilson, he loves the snow. Guess he better, eh? So be glad to take questions or whatever.
Anybody have any questions in the room?
Mike, where are your bees located? What kind of environment are they in? Are they around farm fields, near woods? What's the
I would say farms and into foothills, not in the forest, but in that zone between farm fields and old farms going by. My best apiaries used to be in farm fields.
I'm sorry?
Because my best apiaries, my best production apiaries used to be, 30 years ago, used to be in farm fields, in farm locations, because they had pastures. Right. And pastures had white clover. And they had hay fields. And hay fields had white clover. And they had hedgerows with sumac and every basswood tree and everything else. And now what have we got? Well, we got corn. And then we have some corn. And then they dug up the pastures and tiled it and planted corn, and they dug up the hedgerow so the corn wouldn't get shaded. And it's terrible. The Champlain Valley is turning into a cornfield, and there's no honey in corn.
You come down here.
Yeah.
Right. So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we live it.
It's terrible. I mean, the cows stay in the barn all their lives. They never go out on pasture. It's terrible. Anyway.
Anyone who's got a question online can feel free to come off mute as well.
How do you transport the brood frames?
Excuse me again?
Yeah, how do you transport the brood frames?
Well, in the cell building yard, the brood factories are right there. So we put it in a box and get the box set up. If we're doing cell builders, 2 frames of honey and 7 frames of emerging. And when we get the box full, we take it over to the brood factory and put it on top of the queen excluder. Easy. For the two apiaries that are different, same thing, really. We put a box on a hand truck pallet, and then we fill it up with what we need. And we strap a cover on it, chipboard or something, OSB board cover on it, and then take it to the cell building yard and do the same thing. Put it on top of the queen excluder. They're not that far. My brood factories are at the most 4 miles away from my cell building yard, so it's not much of a transport. And we leave the bees on it. We don't take frames of brood with no bees. We leave the bees on them, so they're taking care of the brood. They're keeping it warm as we're working in the day. And, it might take us half a day to set up what we need. And, and then of course, when we're doing nucleus colonies, we just take the nuke boxes to the brood factory yard and fill up the nuke boxes with what we need, and then strap it and take it to a nuke yard and give it to queens. So there's, we're always transporting brood with bees, not without.
I have a question on the nuke boxes, how they're made. Is that standard 3/4 inch board?
Sure, 3/4 inch pine. Yep.
Yep.
And okay. Its standard measurement is what is it, like 16 1/4 by 19 7/8 outside measurements. And so the outside measurement of the nuke box that goes on top of the double would be a half width. So that'd be 8 1/8 by 19 7/8.
Yeah, but all 3/4 inch boards.
All 3/4 inch boards. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
I have access to pine here. So, in past years, last year, I can get 1 by 12 planed, kiln dried, planed 4 sides for 85 cents a foot. Well, this year, well, you know how it is this year. This year was $1.40. But even at $1.40, you need 6 feet to make a box. It's still
I saw
$8 and something cents. How much does a box cost you in the catalog? Even if I buy the junk from ML Incorporated, they're ridiculous. I mean, $15, $20 for a box. Gosh, how can anybody expand or start a bee business, a bee operation, and pay prices like that? It's just crazy.
Yeah, I'm gonna try making some.
Yeah, it's easy to make. I mean, once you know how.
Great. Well, sounds like we're kind of wrapping up.
Okay.
I got a quick question, please.
Yep, please do.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Palmer, with all due respect, I saw you in Montreal, and I really love your take on bees. it's been a refreshing thing. This is Scott from Pennsylvania. So I just have a real quick question. When I looked at your, following your presentation, you talked about putting, a new queen or an old queen in a new hive. That it wasn't a good scenario.
Explain that.
So you had a failing hive. You took the queen out and you put it in, say, just a sturdy nuke.
Okay, and with the old queen.
Yes.
Yes. So that would probably have been on sacrificing one of those non-productive colonies, Why not just use that queen? You got a queen, right? Well, there's a reason it's a non-productive colony. And so
okay, go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
I always blame the queen. And I've done this too many times where, you give her a second chance, or you try to build her up, and it never reaches what you think it's going to reach. It's because there's an issue with the queen. And so, yeah, you can build a colony up, but it really needs to be requeened afterward. One of my employees, we would say, oh, this nuke is pretty good. It's supposed to be a full-size nuke. It's supposed to be, really exploding. And it's got 2 frames of brood or 2 frames of bees. And it's just not. And he would take those and he would sell them or give them to people. And you know what? In every case, it wasn't good. It just didn't build up properly.
And in my defense, I think Apiaries has done a thing where he did a study about queen switching with
yes,
commercial.
I know that study. I question that. Tarpey or somebody did that. And they're talking about queens that are doing poorly in this colony. If you put it in a stronger colony or whatever it is, it does great. And so they're trying to say it's not the queen, it's the colony or the environment or something like that. Well, I don't know. I buy it.
And I'm not asking you to buy it as commercial beekeeper. I understand that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But I've seen this, and I do 20+ hives, and I can change a queen out, and sometimes they work. And I think it has to be something looked at.
Right. Sure.
It may not be, black or white. It may be a gray zone. Okay.
Right. Truly. Well, for me as a commercial beekeeper, I can't take the chance that I'm going to do this work and it's not going to be what I want it to be.
Absolutely.
Make queens. I raise queens. I got plenty of queens. There's no point in me for using an old queen, and hopefully that I do this or that and the thing will actually be better. I've seen it too many times where, for instance, you have a colony in the spring and it's just not building up okay, and it's slow, and then okay, we're going to requeen that, and they got queen cells, excuse me, super C or something, and they're going to change their queen. Okay, we'll let them go. And so in the springtime, what do you have? You have the same thing you had last spring, this colony that won't build past 3 or 4 frames of brood.
Okay, but sir, from my understanding, it's not about that. It's about genetics.
Right.
So I'm more worried about genetics than about other stuff.
Right.
So that's where I'm placing my emphasis.
I mean, I'm sure you could find queens that are slow in the spring because of genetics, and they're, once the flow gets going really well and all like that, and all the resources are there, and she's got some population, some support staff, they explode. Yes, of course, I've seen that too.
All right.
But you know, I can't get stuck. I can't get stuck that, you know, 2 months down the road, I said, why didn't I requeen this thing? So I do it. And I raise all my own queens, and I select from, so I supposedly have good genetics. And so to me, in my situation, it's not worth it. In your situation with 20 colonies, maybe it is. Maybe you can fool around with it more and you know, and keep better track of things and follow them more closely. I can't do that.
No, I fully understand that. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Talk to you. Did I actually meet you in Montreal?
Yes, you did. Out in the with a bee inspector, couple bee inspectors out in the courtyard.
Yes. Surely.
And surely. I was really rude to you, and I apologize.
You were?
Yes, and I apologize.
Okay. Well, no need. I'll get you next time.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Surely.
And it's on record. It's on record now, okay?
There you go. I wouldn't have known if you hadn't brought it up anyway, so, you know, that you were rude, so I wouldn't know that. Anyway.
So, okay, let's take one more question if there's one more, and then we'll wrap it up.
I have a question.
Okay, Tim, you get the last one of the night.
All right, great. Could you explain more about the oxalic pads? Our dandelion is coming in pretty strong right now, and you said that's when they're starting to treat with oxalic pads. I haven't heard that before. Could you explain that process?
You know, I have. If you want to go to Randy Oliver's site and read what he has to say, or if I believe in this month's ABJ, American Bee Journal, he has another segment of his work on this treatment. But I guess what they're doing is they're making a mixture of 1-to-1 oxalic acid and glycerin, and having it absorbed in a kind of a pad, a maximizer pad or something like that. And then they're putting a certain number of these pads in between the double deeps, and you know, early in the season. And it seems to be keeping the varroa mite population from increasing. And I know people I've said in Florida, in Vermont, in New York, that are experimenting with this thing, and they're going, oh my gosh, you know, after a year, I'm going to do it again. I'm not finding any varroa mites. So, you know, all I'm asking for is if we could find something to get the, you know, my harvest takes me so long that, you know, we start at the end of July, the beginning of August, but it might take me till the middle of September. Well, by the middle of September, anything that's got much of a mite load at all is done. Even if you treat the mites, the colony's done. But if we could find something that would prevent the mite load from expanding exponentially until we can get to the broodless period, wow, that to me is something.
Would you keep them on all season then, or just as a springtime
I'm not
treatment?
sure exactly how long. So you'll have to go on Randy Oliver's site and look at and dissect his information, or look in that. I think they're leaving it on for at least a couple months. You know,
okay.
right through the summer. I think right through midsummer and beyond. And it's a very slow release thing. So.
All right, I have to check that out. I appreciate that.
For sure. Yep.
All right. Well, we're right at 9 o'clock.
If we're done with questions, I just like to have about 5 minutes here.
Oh yeah, sure.
And so I have a GoFundMe, and let's see if I can find it here. Share. So here's my GoFundMe. So it's really it's for the kids in in Mexico, in Oaxaca, Mexico, in the state of Oaxaca, Mexico, that are beekeeping students at the high schools. And, you know, they really don't have a lot of resources. They don't really have workable bee suits and, you know, gloves with holes in them. I mean, they get Africanized bees, which aren't real bad there. I mean, they're not really vicious, but these kids really had nothing. So in 2019, I started a fund, and, you know, I was working with a high school, and so I actually raised over $6,000 for them, and we were going to donate it to the school. And then my driver who went to the school said, we really ought to not give it to the school because you never know if they'll use a general fund or not. So let's give the money to the kids. So we did. And we were able to give bee suits and veils and everything, gloves, a hive tool, a smoker, a beehive with bees. Every one of these kids got one of those. And that's, you know, that's the beginning of their beekeeping career. You know, maybe it's never going to amount to much, but it might be a way for them to make some money right now for their families or their future families. And so, you know, why would I be? And so if you want to go on my Facebook site, you can find the link to it. But why would I be so passionate about this? Well, you know, I've been down to enough times, and I've met so many wonderful people there. For example, in 2017, I met a woman, and we were so attracted to each other. It was amazing. Well, Elvira was 92 years old, and she was absolutely the elder statesman of the beekeeping community. And we just we hit it right off, you know, and we talked through an interpreter. She knows zero English, and I know I'm slow with my Spanish. And so, you know, we're talking about, I gave her a hat, a beekeeper's hat from Vermont. And, you know, she says, you know, nobody important's ever spoken to me before. Well, she didn't even go to school through past fourth grade. She had bees since she was 14 years old, and she's 92. And I gave her this hat, and she says, oh my gosh, nobody's ever given me anything before. And we're talking, and she says, you know, I can speak to you and you don't know what I'm saying. And you can speak to me and I don't know what you're saying. But it doesn't really matter. And I said, well, Elvira, what does matter? ¿Qué es importante? What's important? And she says, el corazón, the heart. And that still brings chills to me. That melted me so much that, you know, I decided I'm gonna do something for these kids. Well, so now I've started another one. I'm already over the goal of 10,000. I can't believe it. So, you know, if you can find, if you have $5, I don't care, $10, if you can afford to, or if you'd like to donate, please do. I'd like my fee tonight to go to the fund. All my Zoom fees this winter have been going to the fund. So, you know, we're going to get there. I'll bet you we can help the kids in 5 or 6 schools and give them a start in their beekeeping. So, you know, that's why I'm so passionate about this. These people are so wonderful. They treat me like a prince. Oh my gosh. And so I'm going to help them as much as I can. So if you can help us out, please do. If you can, I'll understand. Anyway, thank you.
Great. Well, no, we took all our questions. Thank you very much, Mike Palmer, for giving us this talk.
Yeah, we'll see you again. I hope you have a good year this year.
Great, you as well. Hope it warms up for you.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I guess it will sometime. I mean, June is coming.
All right,
you all take care now. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mike.